You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
This is Salt and Spine.
Initially, when I started developing recipes, I thought, well, they're such different things, fashion and food. And I come to realize there's a lot of similarity in the approach. They say you eat with your eyes. And if that's how you're scrolling online, you see a great sweater. I mean, it has to look great, but just like that sweater has to, feel good. The fabric has to be right. The fit has to be right. That dish, which looks great with all, that's all pretty it has to taste great. It has to nourish you. It has to bring you joy. That's the hope.
Hi there, I'm Brian Hogan Stewart, and you're listening to Salt and Spine, the podcast where we bring cookbooks to life. As we head into the holiday entertaining season, and Thanksgiving is just around the corner, we're joined this week by someone who deeply understands hosting as both an art and an act of love. Now, you may know Peter Som, today's guest, as a celebrated fashion designer whose work has graced runways and red carpets. He's dressed everyone from Beyonce to Michelle Obama. But among his friends and fans, Peter is equally admired for something decidedly more delicious. He is an exceptional entertainer. He's generous, intuitive, and never fussy. And Peter throws the kinds of gatherings where food is stylish, the cocktails flow, and everyone seems to feel instantly at home. That spirit is woven throughout his new cookbook, which is also an incredible guide for everyday home cooking. The book is called Family Style: Elegant Everyday Recipes Inspired by Home and Heritage, and its roots are in his Cantonese upbringing in Northern California, where Peter says food meant comfort and safety. We have a great conversation for you today with Peter, who joined us in our virtual studio. We talk about how cooking and fashion both start with what we see, but really matter when they make us feel something. We talk about family style eating and how that brings out the best in a home cook and your guests. We talk about Cantonese flavors and California seasonality. And of course, Peter gives us some of his essential tips for entertaining and hosting. Of course, as always, we close with our culinary game, where Peter will turn some of our surprise ingredients into dinner party magic. We also have 3 featured recipes from Peter's cookbook for Substack subscribers this week. We have the char bacon cheeseburgers, Peter's quick scallion pancakes, and another recipe we talk about in the episode, his grandma's apple cake with salted maple caramel. Whether you're just looking for some weeknight inspiration, or you're hosting the holidays this year, or even just a simple show-stopping apple cake, I think you'll find Peter's approach refreshing and full of heart. We've got a great chat for you, so let's head now to our virtual studio where Peter Som joined us to talk cookbooks. Well, hi, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us on Salt and Spine.
Thank you, Brian. I'm excited to be here.
Thrilled to have you and happy to talk about your cookbook, Family Style: Elegant Everyday Recipes Inspired by Home and Heritage. We always like to start a little bit at the beginning, and conveniently, I kind of want to start right where your book starts too, because you open one with the dedication to your mother and your grandmother, but also with this really incredibly vivid, wonderful scene from your grandmother's apartment and sort of the typical way you were always greeted when you arrived at her apartment, the "have you eaten," which I think a lot of folks who have this sort of similar relationship with family members like grandparents might be familiar with, but you choose to sort of open the book that way, arriving to her apartment in the Bay Area. And when you think back to those early memories, like, talk a little bit about the role that food played and how you sort of initially started to form that relationship with food early on, and these 2 really powerful female influences you had.
Yeah, it is really, the relationship to food really started because of them. And I think, starting for me, the cookbook starting off painting a picture of growing up in the Bay Area with my grandmother, going to her apartment and experiencing the smells and the tastes and everything and combining that with her affection. That's sort of like a big bang kind of moment where you associate. I started to associate love and security, and and family with food, because that was how she expressed her love. I think Chinese are traditionally not the most fully expressive people. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so and food was the way to really express love, and that initial assessment, like, have you eaten?
Mhm.
That sort of like that encompassed sort of everything. That meant I care about you, I love you, I'm thinking about you, I want you to be good.
Yeah. And I appreciate that it was often a two-part question too, because it didn't really matter if you had eaten. The second question was always an "Are you hungry?" too, regardless of the
Absolutely.
first. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean her job I think was to make sure I was always full.
Sure. You write that every time you turn on your wok, you feel that sort of immediate connection to her. Is there a specific dish where you still really feel that deep pull?
Absolutely. I mean, I've peppered the cookbook throughout with a lot of her recipes. I've streamlined a few and tweaked them a bit, but a lot of them are really her flavors, those flavors I grew up with, and some of them are recipes that I completely forgot about in a way.
Okay.
Because my grandmother has been gone 20 years, so for me, this was really a way to get to know her again as an adult, as the adult human being.
Yeah.
um, so some of the recipes really, it wasn't until I talked to my sister, she's like, "What about this one?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I completely forgot." So like,
Sure.
the apple
Yeah.
cake, she did mostly Chinese food, but desserts were always Western. So the apple cake was one that was always, she could somehow whip it up, I feel like in 5 minutes. It
Yeah.
was like, "Do you want apple cake?" And we'd be like, "Yes." And she would just run off and make it. It would suddenly appear. There's a stir fried shrimp recipe. There's a lemon chicken recipe, which is really one of my favorites. That was one that my mom recalls her testing on my mom and her five siblings for like about a week straight,
Okay.
because she wanted to get it right. She had a pharmacist background, so I think a pinch of this and a pinch of that was not quite her thing. Which you sort of hear grandmas, that's the thing.
Right.
She was very, much into measurements and a methodical approach to recipes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, tons of recipes in there that bring me back.
I love the apple cake. Was the caramel drizzle something she did, or is that something you added?
I did that.
You
Yeah,
did that.
I
I love it.
literally I added that and the ice cream, of course.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And yeah, we always had it just completely just apples,
Right.
just the apple cake itself. Yeah.
The apple cake for sure.
Usually still warm from the oven. So,
Wonderful. Yeah, there's certainly, you write about that element of methodical approach to cooking, sort of an element of perfectionism that you write about both with your mother and your grandmother's approach to cooking, right? Like picking pea pods one by one, being very meticulous and like finding the perfect bow and being willing to travel a distance for them. Is that something that you, as you were putting this book together, sort of came to you later? Or was that part of your memory throughout, especially, having, as you revisited some of these recipes and things, did that sort of change how you remembered some of those moments in the kitchen?
I think that that was definitely definitely a core memory. And to this day, when I go with my mom to go to the supermarket, she won't, she will really choose very methodically.
Yeah.
And I think that honestly comes from them growing up. My mom was born, she was probably 3 in Hong Kong when World War II happened, and Hong Kong was quite war torn. And so her first years of her life, food was not like that available. It was usually a lot of rice
Sure.
and a tiny bit of meat, a tiny, tiny bit. So food wasn't really available. And,
Right.
and so I think that for her was a core memory, which she brought forward. coming to the States and then all the way till now, making sure that, every gailan she picked or every bok choy she picked was at the grocery store was a good one.
Right.
And I think that's also just like, for her, it's like, the idea of not wasting money. You've picked these ones. These are the good ones. There's not going to be any waste.
Sure. You write, a lot about the influence that they had on you, but you also write a bit about being a product of the latchkey kid era and, growing up in Northern California, and your parents were working. I think were they both architects? Is that right?
Both architects, yeah.
Both
Exactly.
architects. So you had, you also had this experience of coming home after school. You had Campbell's soup at your disposal, watermelon slices. You write about Scooby-Doo being perpetually on TV. But you sort of then had that moment to improvise and cook solo a bit and sort of experiment in the kitchen. How did that sort of shape the way that you cook now, to having that, I guess you would call it, freedom in a sense, after school in that window?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, there were sort of 4 hours of freedom, I think, or 3 to 4 hours of freedom when I got home and you got a snack and watched cartoons and that kind of thing. Um, I've always, really thought about a creative approach, into whatever I did. I mean, I think I'm a creative person from my fashion background to how I approach recipes and developing a recipe. There is a sense of creativity that I want to kind of imbue because that's the fun part. I mean, that's sort of where
Right.
the possibilities are endless and where you can kind of play with flavors and, whether it's, opening tomato Campbell's soup and, mixing it with something, from Campbell's soup and whatever's in the fridge, like American cheese or whatever,
Sure.
to now where I'm playing with, miso and five spice and different flavors. Um, the approach is pretty fundamentally the same. Because for me, that is the fun part. That initial creative spark is where everything's possible.
Yeah, I like that you made a connection to us then via creativity to what ultimately became your career, because you write, about your relationship to food and cooking early on, but then you go on to study art history, or art initially, art history. Okay, and then on to fashion. And so talk a little bit more about that thread that connects like fashion Peter and culinary Peter, and that creativity element, and how you sort of paved this career for yourself that led you into fashion, but ultimately now as a cookbook author too.
It's interesting. I mean, I wanted to be a fashion designer since I was in the fifth grade. I was a very shy kid and I was
Mhm.
always drawing. And my first sketches were my mom, really. I mean,
Okay.
they were crude, kind of like little, very primitive sketches.
Sure.
And I just drew what was in front of me. It was her. So I drew like a triangle with a head and arms and legs, and eventually, um, a, the body became more of a body. Then I drew the clothes on the body, and so for me, that was like, I've decided at fifth grade that was like my goal. But fast forward to I started a line, and this is the short version, but I
Sure.
started a clothing line, and I was so focused on doing fashion, having my own fashion line for so long. I mean, I was focused. But the whole time, food was always, a parallel track, a quieter parallel track
Yeah.
that during my fashion years of doing fashion shows and going to the Met Gala and all these kind of amazing experiences, which at the time were maybe a little terrifying.
Sure.
And now I'm very grateful that I had those moments. Cooking was really what kept my feet on the ground. Cooking was grounding. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end. And hopefully the end was something delicious to eat.
Yeah.
So cooking is a very finite process. You eat it and then it is gone. Um, so it's always been there. And I think, initially when I started developing recipes, I thought, well, they're such different things, fashion and food. Um, and I come to realize there's a lot of similarity in the approach. They say you eat with your eyes,
Right.
and that's how you're scrolling online, you see a great sweater. I mean, it has to look great, but just like that sweater has to, feel good. The fabric has to be right. The fit has to be right. That dish, which looks great with all, that's all pretty with, has to taste great. It has to nourish you. It has to bring you joy. That's the hope. And, what my clothing I've always thought of as clothing. There's a Scarmento term called front of closet. These are
Right.
pieces you want to wear all the time. And, that's really my approach to recipes. I want my recipes, especially in the cookbook, to be recipes you'll make over and over. It's not like a one and done. This took 4 days, and it's, and there's a time for that, Thanksgiving, whatever, special times. But I think I'm an impatient person. I love big flavor. I love things fast,
Yeah.
and so I think I really did find over time that there are a lot of parallels to food and fashion. The
Yeah.
Venn diagram is not as the overlap is not as tiny as I thought.
Sure, sure. And you write too in the book to that point that style shouldn't be belabored, and apply sort of that concept to cooking as well, noting that, even something as simple as a drizzle of olive oil or a sprinkle of salt can have a dramatic impact on a dish and take it from everyday to a little bit elevated or elegant. It also, as I was looking through that section of your book, or reading, when I read that, I was reminded of the in fashion, editing is everything, and that approach to sort of like having these recipes that are approachable and curated, but also the things that you want to be cooking every day. How did you sort of come up with the family style concept then? Talk a little bit about that. You named the book Family Style. You write about family style in the book. Share, your rules and tips for how to eat family style. But how did you land on that as the concept?
It's interesting. It really it's one of these things where you was thinking about the book and really what the book is about, and again, it all goes back to those childhood memories, growing up around the table and all the big platters of food coming to the table. And I think at home, most of us eat family style. For sure, in Chinese households,
Right.
family style is, nobody's eating plated food like a
Right.
restaurant
Yeah,
style at home necessarily.
exactly.
And so for me, it, that sense of home, that sense of communal eating was so important to capture. And I thought, oh my gosh, family style. I think the style kind of captures my fashion background and my kind of love of design and, all those things.
Right.
And to me, the two words together kind of really brought together sort of both the earthiness and the comfort of family, but also it can be done, like you said, there's a way to easily just give things a little zhuzh to make it look great. And again, going back to eating with your eyes and that kind of thing. And, but yeah, I mean, I think when I did runway shows and even as I design now, it's like, I like a sense of effortlessness. I love a sense of
Mm.
ease. I think it's Bill Blass, who's a designer I worked for way back in the day. I think
Sure.
one of his quotes was funny. There's nothing as unsexy as a woman who looks like she's trying too hard.
Uh-huh.
Kind of a antiquated way to put it,
Right.
but but I think the takeaway there is, just effortlessness is great. And I think from fashion and how my approach there, that's definitely my approach to how food looks.
Sure. You do offer some guidance for eating and serving family style, which, to me felt a little bit like we should know these things, but I wonder if you felt like a pull to include them because you still see, friends breaking these rules, doing things like not using serving spoons or taking the last piece of something or reaching clear across for the furthest piece of something. Why did you feel it was important to make sure those were presented to your readers here?
You would think they would be common
You would
sense,
think.
but on the regular, of friends, like lots of everybody, you see that, I've witnessed that they're not always the case.
Sure.
My mom definitely liked sort of the etiquette of things. I mean, I make her sound really uptight. She's actually hysterical and really funny.
Yeah.
But there's a way things should be, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think, there's one, joke refrain that she'd always do when growing up, and we'd be at the dinner table, and she'd be like, "Rule number 863: no elbows on the table."
Yeah. I
Um,
love it.
so yeah. I felt like this was just the basics, just for people to look at, because you'd think they'd be common sense, but they're not. So
Sure. Yeah, you would think. You also include some tips for hosting in the book, and I know we want to talk a bit about holiday season, because it's imminent. It's here essentially in a minute. But you initially just sort of offer some tips for hosting, simple things like keep it simple or focusing on just a few curated dishes, and also like essential dim the lights. Tell us a little bit about how you help. You're such a prolific host yourself. You've hosted many a dinner party, some beautiful ones. And how do you sort of advise others who might be nervous about hosting? Or is there like a particular rule you offer to somebody who's, maybe planning a big Thanksgiving or something?
I think the first thing to remember is that if somebody's coming over to your home, they're coming over to see you. They're coming over to meet people, see friends. That is really the main thing to remember.
Sure.
But in terms of sort of the practicalities, yeah, I think when you're structuring like a dinner party, I kind of sort of tier the dishes in a way. Like there's always like one dish, I call it Beyonce. That's
Okay.
that is like the dish that you spent the most time on, that is maybe has to be made like put in the oven when people get there, or whatever it is. That's sort of the star. And
Right.
then you have the two other dishes that maybe can be prepared as ahead of time as much as possible. It's already assembled and just has to be reheated. It's just really, think about, making sure not every single thing has to go in the oven at the same time, or, and tier your dishes. And also help from the store is always fine.
Yeah.
You put if you put it on a great platter, it's great. Who cares? And, and then lighting for sure, dim the lights.
Yes. So
Candles are your
important.
best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I say in the book, you don't want to feel like you're eating in a CVS,
Right.
or your local pharmacy. So think about your favorite restaurant. What's the vibe? Dim the lights, candles. And, in terms of table, I've done everything from order flowers from a florist, my favorite florist, to going to the corner deli and buying a bouquet and taking it apart and just putting it in bud vases down the table.
Right.
That's enough. It doesn't have to be a whole production.
Yeah.
And so it's just a few steps that will take you far in creating the vibe. But again, at the end of the day, people are coming to hang out with you. They're not expecting a 4-star Michelin dinner. So who cares if the pie burns?
Exactly. Yes.
Because I've had my share of disasters. So.
Yes, who hasn't? I would be shocked if someone out there has never had a disaster if they host regularly. But I do appreciate all the analogies you make, that you don't want to eat in the pharmacy, that you don't need to, have 14 dishes to cater to everyone because you're not the Delta Lounge buffet, you write.
Yeah.
People are coming to enjoy the company. It's really true. I bookmarked so many of the recipes in the book and wish we had hours to talk about all of them. But you open the book, the first recipe is Wolf's Kewpie, so with Kewpie mayonnaise. I I thought that was such a fun way to open the book. And there's a few egg recipes that I really loved. But talk a little bit about that, because I think it's such an interesting recipe to open the book, because you make a reference to a restaurant, right? You have some inspiration from Libertine egg dish, but it's also very much adaptable for a home cook, and sort of a play on, a French bistro dish with some other ingredients, to give it that sort of perfect little zhuzh, in the Peter style.
Yeah, it's really stems from my mom loves French food, so oats mayonnaise
Okay.
is a class, like you said, a classic French bistro dish,
Yeah.
and one of my favorite restaurants in the West Village, Libertine, as you mentioned, serves a version of oats mayonnaise, and oats mayonnaise is essentially a lazy man's deviled egg. You
Right.
don't have to take out the yolk. You don't have to combine it all, whip it together, put it back in the little hole of the egg white. This is essentially, and in France, it can be as much as half an egg just with mayonnaise on top and some salt, some flaky sea salt. But Libertine does a version where they really create more of a lovely mayonnaise sauce, and they drape it over the eggs. And I thought, oh, I'd love to. I'm so inspired by that. And I did a version take on it using Kewpie mayo. And Kewpie mayo, if people don't know, is a Japanese mayonnaise. And it is much richer than American mayonnaise. It's got more egg yolk. It's got a little MSG in there. Not a bad thing. It's really got a
Right.
delicious depth of flavor. And it's already, in a way, a ready-made sauce. But I've combined it with miso and some rice wine vinegar and some other things to really create a simple sauce that you just can whisk up or even, blend up really quickly. And, and the final flourish, again, is some salmon roe, if you want to put a little of those on top, the little beautiful red jewels, which is optional. But it's a great way, again, to start an evening or like a brunch or a lunch. And again, it's the kind of thing where everything that is a dish where everything is made in, you can make it in advance completely. And it's so great.
I love that. And you have the salmon roe, you have the furikake on there. I think it's just really a really interesting recipe to open with. And then you follow it, I think, almost immediately, if it's not the exact, it's the second recipe then is your pot sticker frittata, which I think is also just such a approachable recipe. You write in the head note that you actually sleep better at night knowing there are pot stickers in the freezer. But I thought that those two recipes were just such a fun way to open it. And then later in the book, you have the recipe for the Chinese steamed egg, which I'm curious, you adapted it a bit by adding Parmigiano, bacon, sourdough. You write about how your mother made it frequently as you were growing up. How did she react to that adaptation of your
I actually
family,
made it for
of a
her
family
when I
dish,
was
an
back in San
heirloom?
Francisco, and she loved it. I
Yeah.
think she's definitely a food person. She loves trying new flavors and loves food. Um, it's traditionally it's the steamed egg, which is usually either topped with like salted fish or other things. And for me, I love brunch, I love
Sure.
breakfast, I love eggs, and I thought let's kind of add in some crunch, and the texture in there, and throw in some sort of traditional, American breakfast, flavors on there. I think it's all about texture for me. So it's always whatever dish I'm doing, I always want to bring crunch or other and whatever texture there is, to the party. So this was a great way, kind of a fun take on again mixing two cultures and doing something that is delicious.
I also really loved the recipe for burnt miso cinnamon toast. Whenever I see something that's burnt in a cookbook, I always wonder if there's a chance it came from an accident, or if something wasn't meant to be cooked quite so long or toasted quite so long. But I love that sort of throwback to childhood flavors with that miso cinnamon
was
toast.
definitely like a treat. It's not something we had all the time, and not that it's that hard to make or anything, but yeah, they did. I love miso. I didn't grow up with it. It's really obviously more Japanese. And so coming to New York many, many, many years ago, and really just kind of quote unquote discovering all the uses of, I mean, white and yellow miso, red miso, all that kind of thing. And the sort of instant depth of flavor, the sweet, the salty, everything of it. I find really adds just another layer of flavor to anything. And I thought, I love again sort of the miso and the butter coming together, that fat, mixing in with all those spices, and put it on a piece of crunchy toast. It's so good.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, the miso butter appears again in the scrambled eggs on toast with the spicy sauce. The miso butter, I think, is such
Yeah,
a
yeah.
miso in
I
general is
always
such
have a big tub in my refrigerator. I also have red miso in there in my refrigerator at all times. And it is a fermented product. It can last not forever, but for a very, very, very long time. And I think
Sure.
I would encourage people to play with it. I mean, and you don't have to use a tiny, tiny little bit. You can use heaping tablespoons if you want. You can use quite a bit. And I mean, we're talking about the yellow and
Yeah.
white miso. Red miso is definitely more concentrated. You shouldn't go too crazy with it. But yeah, miso is my friend.
Yes. Well, we talked a bit about holiday entertaining, but while we're on the topic of recipes, I wonder if there are recipes that you would say are sort of like holiday MVPs in the book, especially with Thanksgiving and winter holidays coming up. If there's, recipes that you would tell people who are hosting this year to add to their menu.
I mean, for sure, the two that come to mind are I have a big, beautiful beef stew. And, and again, beef stew is something I think we all maybe have grown up having. And this one, is sort of based on my mother's version. So, and again, something that's low and slow in the oven. It's so comforting. Everybody loves it. The other one is I do a short rib recipe with black garlic. And I try. Black garlic is definitely, admittedly, is a specialty ingredient. You may have to look for it or order it online, but it is something again that will stay in your refrigerator. And black garlic are basically garlic cloves that have been aged. They're not quite fermented, but they have been aged to the point where they are black, and the texture is almost like a roasted garlic clove. They're soft and unctuous and slightly funky, not too funky, and they bring this beautiful depth of flavor to things. And for me, short ribs are something that are synonymous with the holidays and comfort and fall, and and something that whenever I have people coming over, they are so excited when anybody I feel like is like so excited when you say short ribs. They're very excited. So
it's so true. I felt myself get excited just now hearing you say it, and I know that we're not even going to eat it, but short ribs do have that sort of element of excitement to them. I'll also make a pitch for the big seafood pot pie as standing out to me as just such a great one for holiday entertaining. I feel like it's another showstopper. I mean, it looks stunning, the presentation, of course.
it's yeah, that one is so good. I mean, it's really my mom back in the day. She would take those Pepperidge Farms individual little puff pastry, like sort of cups, whatever they're called, and
Right.
do like a Teal Saint Jacques, and you put in a creamy seafood kind of mix. And I thought, well, this is family style. I want to do one big ass
Yeah.
seafood pot pie, and the puff pastry, it's sort of double layered, so it rises extra high, and you actually bake it on the shelf below, and then stick it on top at the end. So
Right.
it actually moves. You will never have a soggy puff pastry with this. So yeah, and it's very impressive when you bring it to the table.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we talked a bit about how people who host are not always perfect. I'm wondering if you have any holiday disasters that you've either avoided or survived over the course of your many years of entertaining around the holidays.
Oh gosh, I mean, there's been my fair share of disasters. Let's see. In terms of the holidays, I mean, there was one year where I totally messed up the turkey.
Yeah.
I completely like I mean, like, everything you maybe, everyone says no one really loves turkey. Well, and this is the reason why, the breast gets super dry, like it's in
Right.
there forever. But it was severely dry in parts. It was raw in some parts. I was like, oh my, and this is when I was cutting it, and I was like, okay, we're like,
Sure.
yeah, and so that was a disaster. I mean, I think once with the I need marshmallows on my sweet potatoes or my yams. I'm a marshmallow person, but
Okay.
I almost had I almost had the kitchen on fire by broiling them. And the entire top was black, like ebony. It was jet black.
Yes. Yeah.
And that, good thing about that is you can literally take the whole black part off. It's like literally like it's just fused together
Yeah.
in one
It's like a cracker at
lava
that
flow.
point. You
Yeah,
just
yeah,
lift it
yeah.
up in one
So
piece.
I was
Yeah.
able to really
Yeah.
salvage. There was one dinner party. It was in the holidays. It wasn't for Christmas, but I remember having to, at the last minute, I had to order a delivery of sides, like vegetables,
Uh-huh.
because I think one I completely forgot to buy from the grocery store. The other one I totally burnt. I think there's a lot of burning going on.
Yeah.
So I had to DoorDash like sides. Um,
You got to
you
do
got to
it.
do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But I think, like they say, shit happens. And there's,
Exactly.
don't cry over spilt milk or burnt marshmallows. Yeah.
Right, right. People always talk about the Julia Child scene when she drops something in the kitchen, but for me, it's always the scene in Mrs. Doubtfire when everything just goes to hell and everything gets ordered in and it's stunning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And who's to know?
Who's to know that you're in drag and you're doing like,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just, that's what happens, and so you just gotta laugh. It's never that super funny in the moment, but a glass
Sure.
of wine,
Hindsight.
will solve all problems.
Exactly. Well, let's flip the script for a minute then. If you're not hosting this season, what do you recommend people bring? You're the guest. You're going to somebody's holiday affair, or you're going to a dinner party. What are your go-tos to show up with?
Well, I think the obvious choice is a wine or a champagne or something like that of sorts. I think that is
Sure.
pretty standard and, never not appreciated. So I think that's good. I would say this time of year, a nice red is great, sort of a Zin.
Mm-hmm.
I love Rombauer, so maybe a nice Rombauer Zinfandel, something really berry and deep and delicious. I always think, you always ask the host what, can I bring something? And, oftentimes, some sort of dessert item is always nice. I think there can never be too much dessert. That's my opinion. So,
Sure.
whereas maybe if with sides and other things at a holiday meal, that may be already divvied out or figured out. So, whether it's some chocolates or some other little things, nothing that involves a lot of heating, reheating, or plating or anything complicated. I mean, which is why I say never bring cut flowers. Never bring a bouquet of cut flowers to your host, because they're in the middle of doing things now. They have to find a vase, fill it up, da 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 da.
Right.
Kind of rearrange. Right. It's so. But yeah, I think it's and the thing is, if there's something that you love making, like if you love making Parker House rolls or whatever it is, you could definitely tell your host, I'd love to make these. I think most hosts during the holidays are, if you're volunteering something to bring, they will be happy to accept, because as a host, you're juggling so many dishes. And if one thing can be taken off your plate, I'd say all the better.
Yeah, and maybe you're afraid to ask. So the volunteering of I'll bring something is really meaningful for sure. Well, we're a show on cookbooks, so I wanted to talk just briefly for a minute about cookbooks before we close with our little game. Anything that sort of surprised you as you were putting together your cookbook? Something that you didn't anticipate would go the way it did, or a recipe that, sort of surprised you as you brought it to life through this process?
Yeah, I mean, coming from having done runway collections, you do like 4 a year, you crank through these seasons, you're cranking out
Right.
products. So to really spend, year plus on writing and recipe testing was really a sort of meditative and such a different
Mm,
sort of slower burn. But I think
sure.
in terms of the recipe development, there were for sure, I mean, I probably developed maybe 115 recipes to get to 100. Um, but there were some that I probably tested like 8 times where I was like, I want this. I mean, I have a cake in there. It's a chocolate cake with actually a touch of hoisin in there. Um,
Okay.
and I was like, I know this is going to work. Like the flavors taste good. But I was determined to make it work, and it actually ended up working. But there were other ones where, yeah, you just have to give up. Like this recipe is like it's not destined to sort of, be what you want it to be. I think the thing
Yeah.
that really surprised me was, I mean, I think I learned a lot about myself and I learned a lot about my family. Again, like I said, my grandmother
Sure.
has been gone for 20 years. So it's interesting, my mom has 5 siblings, my aunts and my uncles, and to sort of to talk to them in a way that just wasn't casual conversation, but really asking real questions like a reporter would, you get a different depth
Right.
of when you dig deeper, you really get a depth of knowledge about how they grew up and like how they ate and all these stories that came out that they had probably never told that many people because nobody really asked. So I think
Sure.
that is something I think it's to sort of, I think for people, especially during the holidays, if you're hanging out with grandma and grandpa or your mom, ask these questions. I mean, listen to their stories. I mean, they're, I think we build up our that older generation to be like these perfect people and everything, and they're all just humans trying to do the best they can and under sometimes very different circumstances, very often different
Right.
circumstances that we are so lucky we didn't have to go through. And a lot of them, you know, uh, you know, may have never been asked. So I think that's definitely
Right.
something around the table to think about when we're all chowing down.
Yeah. What great advice. What are there cookbooks or authors that have been particularly influential to you, either as, a cook yourself over your life or that you turn to in this process for sort of guidance or inspiration?
I mean, there are so many cookbooks and cookbook authors over over the years. I mean, first of all, The Joy of Cooking. I know it's a classic. Tome Irma Rombauer is one of
Sure.
my kind of all-time gold standards. All the Otto Lengi cookbooks. I think those
Yeah.
cookbooks really taught me about flavor and using spice as for flavor and really opened up a whole new world of flavor and for me. Um,
Yeah.
I have for sure. Growing up, I was actually it's just being re-released was Martha Stewart's Entertaining. Growing up, we had a
Right.
copy.
Yeah. Lots of press around her re-release now. Yeah.
Growing
Yeah.
up, my sister and I were somehow obsessed with the book. We were obsessed. I mean, we would literally read it like it was like the newspaper because she really
Right.
presented entertaining in a different way that I'd never seen. And so I think
Yeah.
that's a great book. Um, yeah, I mean, I think I definitely look at the walks of life. Their cooking is so like in my like what my comfort food is really the Cantonese stuff they do. This kind
Right.
of my parents are from Hong Kong and the southern China, so that's really that food is my sort of my go-to. But yeah, I mean, I think so many
Sure.
influences, and I think it's just about it's always about staying curious and kind of just being a sponge, really.
I love that. Well, last question before we jump into our game. I feel like so much of your book really speaks comfort to me, like the family style approach. The recipes feel so inviting and comfortable. I'm wondering what's bringing you comfort these days, either in the kitchen or not.
I think for me, what's bringing me comfort, I mean, the things are crazy out there, is
It's true.
people. I think chosen family. I mean, just I think,
Yeah.
for many reasons, I think we're on our phones so much. It's so easy to sort of isolate and just do the crossword puzzle and look at Instagram. But really, just human contact is important. I think in terms of in the kitchen, I am feeling very much into like the stew thing. I think it's during this time of year. I love getting out. Like I have a Le Creuset Dutch oven that I've had for probably some years. That anytime I pull that out, I mean, I just
Sure.
made a minestrone. So soups, stews, anything low and slow, where I can sort of, put on some, Broadway show tunes in the background, have a glass of wine. I love chopping. I love chopping vegetables. For me, it's like such therapy. It's
Okay.
just so satisfying to have a nice sharp knife and just, they don't have to be perfect cuts, but I just love sort of breaking down a vegetable for some reason. Anyway, and then throwing them in the Dutch oven and knowing that something's going to be great. That's definitely comfort for me.
And it's definitely better with show tunes. Well, we always end with a little game. We usually play with a deck of cards because we typically record in person, but I'm going to try and see if I can share my screen. Tell me if this works, because then I can reveal these ingredients to you. Okay, so this basically works a little bit like chop. So I've got 4 types of ingredients for you. So you'll get a vegetable, you'll get a protein, you'll get a flavor, which is, a herb or a spice, etc., and then a secret ingredient. And you have to tell us what you might make if you were presented with these things. You can assume you sort of have a fully stocked pantry at your disposal too. But how does that sound? Ready to play? Okay, perfect. So, first round is called Pantry Magic. You have cabbage as your vegetable. Protein is tofu. Flavor is sesame oil. And the secret ingredient is peanut butter. What might we make?
Okay, so I would probably do a roasted cabbage. So I cut them in wedges and roast them, and then I would maybe brush them with sesame oil. Then I might do a creamy sauce. I would probably blend, if it's silken tofu, I'm going to pretend it's silken tofu.
Sure, okay.
Blend that with some peanut butter and a touch of tahini to bring in some of the sesame oil and create sort of a creamy, and add in a few anchovies and give it sort of a creamy, sort of tahini Caesar vibe. And then, brush the roasted cabbage with it, blast it a little bit more under the broiler, and then serve that with a bit more of the sauce kind of, around the cabbage. And then, and then I'd probably finish it with just a bunch of sliced scallions and a little some toasted sesame seeds, black sesame and regular sesame. So I think I would do that.
Delicious. That sounds incredible. We started easy, so let's see if we can challenge you a little bit more. The next one we're calling Cozy Glam, and our veg is fennel. Protein is chicken thighs. Our flavor is smoked paprika. All right. And secret ingredient is potato chips. There's the cozy or the glam, depending on how you relate to potato chips.
So I would probably do crispy skin chicken thigh. Oh God, okay. I would mandolin the fennel so it's super thin. So I'd crisp up the chicken thigh, the skin side, and then take them out. Add into the chicken fat the thinly sliced fennel, break it, soften it a little bit. I'm also put in some shallots, and then put the chickens back in. Well, first I would do a spice rub with the smoked paprika. I would do paprika. I would probably sugar, salt, pepper, and maybe a touch of spice, and that would go on the chicken skin before I browned it. And then while that's in the oven, I would
Nice.
do a crunchy topping using potato chips and let's see, and some herbs. So I would do sort of like I would do the fennel fronds. I would do a little bit of parsley and do a very fine chop on that, and then add them to the crushed potato chips, and then sprinkle that on top of the chicken. So you kind of get double crunch. You get the skin crispy, and then you get the crunchy potato chip.
Right, an herby potato chip crumble. Oh, that sounds delicious. Okay, we saved, I think, the hardest one for last then. Final round. Thanksgiving is the theme. But vegetable, delicata squash. Beautiful. Protein, turkey breast. Just the breast. Flavor is sage. So far, okay. But the secret ingredient is the holidays came a little early this year, and you also have to use the candy cane pile.
Oh boy, yes. Okay. Let's see. I guess let's see. Turkey breast. That is, yeah. I would maybe do a would I do a roulade? I'm trying to think. I don't know. Do you do roulade out of breasts? I don't actually.
I think you can,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So I would do I would sort of saute. I love delicata squash, and it breaks down really easily. So I would saute that with the sage, olive oil, butter, some bread, some panko in there. I would sort of roulade and then I would have to crush some of the candy cane in there. And then
right in there,
there, just a little bit to give just a little bit of that sort of minty kind of heat, I guess. Not heat, so I don't know what word.
Sure.
And then I would do a roulade, I guess. And then, I would then slice it, and it'd be this beautiful spiral of delicata squash, sage inside. Let's go with that.
I love it. And I imagine it turns out incredible. And for years, you remind everyone that you wowed them with your candy cane stuffed turkey.
Exactly.
So it's a perpetual bragging right.
Exactly. I mean, yeah.
Well, this was great. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us on Salt and Spine. It was a blast.
Thank you, Brian. So much fun. Thank you.
And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can find bonus content from today's show and all of our episodes on our website, saltandspine.com. If you like hearing from your favorite authors on Salt and Spine, and I hope you do, please click subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. We also love to see your ratings on Apple Podcasts. Our show today was produced by me, Brian Hogan Stewart, and the Salt and Spine original theme song was created by Brunch for Lunch. Salt and Spine is typically recorded at the Civic Kitchen in San Francisco's Mission District. The Civic Kitchen offers digital and in-person classes for home cooks, and you can find out more at civickitchensf.com. Thanks, as always, to Jen Nurse, Chris Bonomo, and the Civic Kitchen team, and to our friend Celia Sack at Omnivore Books. We'll be back next week with more stories behind the cookbooks you love.